My name is Roger Hall, and I have the privilege of being the chaplain to the Tower of London. I've been here for 3 years, and what's simply been asked is whether I could just, if you like, set the scene. My job is not perhaps to say too much about Christian Aid, although I want to say from the bottom of my heart, when I was first approached, is there any possibility of us coming here? I said, I'm sure we can persuade Her Majesty to let us use the chapel for Christian Aid. And so we got in touch with the Lord Chamberlain, and that's why we're here tonight. The Tower of London's been here in various guises since 1078. William the Conqueror, after he came here, spent 12 years walking around, bashing the barons up and all the rest of it, and eventually came back here to London, where the Romans had built a capital and where there was evidence of somewhere that was really significant and important. Three things always to remember about William the Conqueror. He was an incredibly good soldier, he was a very fine diplomat, and he was deeply religious. He was a bit of a fanatic in all three of those particular areas. And of course, we in England were the scum of the earth. We were complete barbarians. We lived in mud huts. We were complete and utter savages. He wanted, when he got here to London, he said to himself, how can I entertain my cousins and my friends and other diplomats and others when all we've got is mud huts with these barbarians? So he said, let's commission something that will stand out and be the start of a new empire. And so he sent over to France for a man called Gundulf, a French monk. He said, they haven't even got any stone over there that's any good. So we'll go to Caen and we'll bring some stone over, we'll ship it all over here. And over about an 18-year period, which he never saw completed, the White Tower, as it is now become known, that great bastion, was built. And that became the spiritual home, if you like, of the royal family, if not the home where they lived all the time, for the next 600 years. And it was his grandson and his great-grandson who eventually developed and made the Tower of London, if you like, as the years went by, to the sort of position and the sort of evidence that you see today. This little chapel, that's just sort of build up to get you here, this little chapel, of course, was the chapel that served all the people who worked for the royal family. After all, I said this is the second chapel, the royal chapel. I was very privileged to go and preach a sermon in America recently, and I said to them, we have two chapels. We have the old chapel, built in 1078, the Conqueror's Chapel, as Bishop Richard of London calls it, and then we have our modern chapel, built in 1519. the Americans, of course, took the point. They loved it. So this was where, if you served the royal family, of course, there had to be a little chapel. And in fact, it isn't this one. The walls of the original one were there. That's why there are steps that go down into a crypt area there. And in 1480, that had a really rather bad fire. And when Henry VIII came to the throne, his wife, Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, a deeply religious woman, a woman who gave alms to the poor, a woman who was liked and respected here in London, and as she walked round the tower, saw these people worshipping in this semi-derelict little building, and she said to her husband, "Husband, they need a new chapel." Henry, being Henry, said, well, all right, they can have a new chapel, but they must use all the stones from the original chapel to build this chapel. Henry VIII built very little ecclesiastically, but he built this particular little chapel, and it's the smallest perpendicular church in England. And as you see it today, is very much as it would have been seen by Catherine of Aragon when she came to worship in here for the first time in approximately 1519. And the tomb that's in the middle of the chancel there, which is a blooming nuisance, but that's another story, is Sir Richard Cholmondeley, who was actually responsible for the building of the chapel. And Henry had Spanish cedar brought all the way from Aragon for this particular roof. The windows themselves represent and are very similar to the windows that Catherine would have recognized in her own hometown. Now, as you know, time went by and Henry himself had 584 noblemen of England and women executed, as well as many thousands of others. Most of those were buried here in this chapel, and you are actually sitting on the spot where there were 1,500 bodies. You, sir, are sitting on the spot where Queen Victoria came to listen to the very sad story of the death of Lady Jane Grey. When she came and heard this story, this chapel had fallen into such a way. It had become a garrison, and this had become a garrison church, and there was a large gallery all the way round here. There were bits and pieces all over the place. The floor was falling apart, and she tripped on it, and she said, "What the heck is going on?" And she said, "Please return the chapel to its original status." And so we have Queen Victoria to thank that everything has been restored to as it originally was when Henry VIII built it. Now, you can probably tell I could go on at length, but let me just tell you 4 little things which are really quite important. I think there are 3 or 4 reasons why people come to this chapel still today. The first is that it is a church, a Christian church, where services continue to this day. And some of you may well have been here. We're very proud. We have a wonderful choir. We have a wonderful professional choir that sings here every Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. And we are probably one of the only churches in London that, as you probably know, next year we celebrate 400 years of the King James Bible. The King James Bible has only ever been read in here since 1611. And every Bible has been presented by the monarch. And we're the only church that still continues to use the Book of Common Prayer. Some of you might not be too happy about that, but anyway, that's one of our proud traditions. And people love the Book of Common Prayer, the King James Bible, and our professional choir. And people like Bird and Tallis and Tompkins wrote music for this chapel, which is still sung here regularly. So it's a wonderful feature. And so people come here to worship. Then, of course, we are the second busiest tourist attraction in Europe. Last year we had 2.4 million people came to the Tower of London, making on average 17,000 people a day coming through the main gate, which means that 17,000 people walk past that front door of mine, which is just opposite this little church here. And people come here as tourists. We believe there's over 1 million tourists a year come through the front door there. And they come through because they probably want to see where all these queens are buried. So here we have the memorial and the burial place of Queen Anne Boleyn, wife number 2. Then we have wife number 5, Catherine Howard. Not a good place, this, I'm afraid. And then, of course, we have Lady Jane Grey, the saddest story of them all, buried here. In the royal pavement area, we have 15 members of the royal family, all of whom came to grief in one way or another. 14 of those members had their heads sewn back on in my dining room, just opposite there. Anne Boleyn is the only one who did not have her head put back on again because she had to be buried within an hour to allow Henry to marry Jane. Another reason why people come here is, of course, we are a place of national pilgrimage because St. Thomas More and St. John Fisher are buried here. And many of you will have remembered that the Pope, His Holiness the Pope, when he came just a few weeks ago, made great store in talking about Thomas More. And we have had many more visitors who would like the tour. The shrines are not open to the public. They're only open by invitation. We treat those, one of my roles on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen is to be the guardian of the shrines of Thomas More and of John Fisher. And we take that very seriously. And people have to write and book and make an appointment to come and see those particular shrines. Within this last year, although we don't always advertise these things, for example, the Obamas made a private visit here to the Tower of London, and Mrs. Obama in particular, to come and see the shrine of Thomas More. And last week, by complete contrast, Dawn French was here. And last but not least, we have wonderful groups of people who just like to come and use this place. And I see it as my role as an Anglican priest and on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen to try and make this place as available as we can to many other people to come and enjoy both the history and the flavour and the taste of the Tower of London and of these particular chapels which say a great deal about our history. And so therefore it is an enormous pleasure for me and a great privilege for us to have you, Christian Aid, here this evening and to allow this facility to be used for you to be able to celebrate all that Christian Aid is all about.